The Spinoff Podcast Network.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. The Investment Fix podcast. Tune in today.
The Fold is brought to you by oMedia, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Nau mai, hoki mai ki a The Fold, e mihi nei ko Duncan Gree tōku ingoa. My guest this week is Michelle Ng, who is, man, she is so many things. Started, she's the Spinoff's bookkeeper, or at least for a little while longer. But she's also one of our most, if you look at her CV, one of our most accomplished actresses. She's a director. She's just got, you'll hear in this podcast the sort of extent to which there is just so much range in her career. She's got double major in chemistry and accounting and commerce. She's just got this really, really broad ranging and honestly all at a very high level career. She's basically she was effectively like a child star, part of the cast of McDonald's Young Entertainers, flowed that into roles on The Tribe and even on Xena, and then quite a groundbreaking role on Neighbours as Laurie Lee, and then ultimately I played a role on Fear the Walking Dead when that was, one of the biggest franchises in the world. So there's this huge scale and range to her as an actor that is, only very few New Zealanders have ever touched. And then, she's directed stage productions, music videos, and a trio of productions which really kind of, speak to different characters, speak to different facets of her character. And this is just a tremendously driven person. She talks in the interview about it being an active relaxer, and you really see that. If you leave her alone in a room for 5 minutes, there's a new project getting pushed to treatment stage. She's also an active member of PASC, the Pan Asian Screen Collective, which has done so much good to kind of create opportunity and a voice for the Pan Asian community in New Zealand media. And on top of all of that, there's the thing that we're really here to talk about, which is Here Now, a series which she's just dropping weekly on the Spinoff right now. Comes out of her own production company, and it explores the relationship of 6 New Zealand women with hair. And it's honestly it's one of those sort of hiding in plain sight ideas, and it's so thoughtfully done, and there's a real intimacy and care, and so frequently just a moment that kind of blows you away in terms of it just sort of shaking up what the sort of either the lack of thought or a stereotype associated with a particular practice. It's really, really good. I strongly recommend you track it down on our platforms. This is Michelle Ng on The Fold. Tēnā koe, Michelle. Welcome to The Fold.
Kia ora, Duncan. Thank you for having me.
This is quite weird, because I'm here to talk with you about this glorious and very broad career that you've had, but we're colleagues. You've been the Spinoff's bookkeeper for coming up a year now, and it's just, it almost speaks to when you look at your CV, because you've also got a reusable bag company, and it's just, there's so much. Are you okay? How do you carry all that?
But good question. I think I'm a chronic overworker. The idea of downtime. I'm an active relaxer, I think. That's not to say I've relaxed much in the last year, to be honest. But it's been a real privilege to step into the Spinoff as a finance person and use this other side of my brain that I went to university for. So at least my uni degree has been put to work in some way.
One of your degrees, right?
One of my degrees, yeah.
Ridiculous. Okay, so I want to start. We're going to talk about Here Now, which is your new project for us, which is so beautiful, and I do want to dig into. But I also want to start at the start of your career, sitting opposite a one-time child star. Like I feel like McDonald's Young Entertainers, The Tribe, which was like an enormous genre and groundbreaking show.
Still is, actually, like, weirdly, the people who it spoke to, because this is like early internet days, right? And I think it just really struck a chord with like the then underground, like the sort of innovators, and that they felt really seen and spoken to. And now the audience members are now like full-grown adults, but they still reference it.
Totally. We did a story on it a few years ago, and it absolutely popped for a show that felt, like we
filmed in Lower Hutt in Wellington.
Yeah. And then Neighbours, one of the first Asian characters of Asian descent on the show. Like, just a lot. What did you what was your experience of the industry in that era, and of being part of these quite enormous productions during the absolute peak of the cultural power of television?
Yeah, that's true. I think it's kind of important to remember this is going back to like 90s and the lay of the land was quite different. And I was a child, so it's really like using my adult brain to reflect back is kind of different from like my experience that I lived when I was actually filming those projects. Because at the time I was just like a 13-year-old who really enjoyed dancing and was like an average singer. And
sure that's not true.
Someone decided that I like fitted into the super troupe, in a way that would be appealing. But honestly, back then, like it didn't feel. In full credit to Dennis Spencer, who was the producer behind Young Entertainers, it didn't feel like it was a mandate that he set out to create the super troupe that reflected one of every ethnic, I mean, not in terms of how robust that conversation is now. Like at the time, we were just a group of kids who had the right range of skills, who were charismatic enough to hold a studio audience's attention. And yeah, I felt really lucky. It never really occurred to me that I was Asian and on television. And it's only now as an adult when people sometimes recognize me to say, hey, you were the only person who kind of looked like me on New Zealand television at the time. Now it feels way more important than it did then. Back then it was like just purely entertainment.
I've been around Jane Yee, who had a similar, has had similar people come up and say the same thing. And you, it is interesting to kind of think about the politics of representation then and now. And then it was sort of non-existent, but it was happening. Now it's a much more keenly felt thing. And so you did that. You had that experience within New Zealand, and then you go to Australia, work on Neighbours, which again, I mean, it's wild to think, for me to think that Neighbours is now gone as because I grew up in the UK, and it was Neighbours was just the biggest thing in the world. It was just it was the biggest soap, or it felt like the biggest soap, certainly for my generation, and and it was filmed in a different country. Like I think it's important to not forget just how big of an institution that was at the time you were on it.
Yeah, I mean, it was when I was cast, Neighbours was going through a little bit of a slump. I think the heyday of Neighbours was in the 80s. A lot of the stars had moved on, and I think they were looking to sort of consciously rebrand a little bit. And
Home and Away would have been like
Home and Away was, they were sort of like eating away at the audience. And the casting director came to New Zealand, which was kind of unusual, I think. I'm not really sure the thinking behind that. The casting director came to New Zealand to do some open auditions, and I was a real, I don't know, I just had some moxie in me, I guess, and I lived in Wellington at the time. I caught a train up to Auckland without telling my parents and auditioned, and then caught a train back and kind of promptly forgot about it. And I think I must have turned in an interesting enough audition that they decided to cast me. So I had to break it to my parents. Oh, by the way, I'm just going to move to Melbourne for a year for this show called Neighbours. But yeah, it was that experience as well. I think it was unique in the sense that for my character, Laurie Lee, she was called Laurie Lee. I was able to retain my New Zealand accent, but nothing in the storytelling ever had to reference my cultural heritage, which, like, seems revolutionary even now. Like I was just a character of one of the family characters' girlfriend, and obviously I had the usual soap storylines, but they were all sort of like culturally agnostic, which to me was really liberating. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine that because, we were talking before we came on about the extent to which, things must be, there is within our sort of funding structures, there is a Pan-Asian round and Asian stories must fit in a particular box and how constraining that can feel.
Well, I have a love-hate relationship with that. I think I'm really grateful for the fact that there is a sort of Pan-Asian specific round, because it does, I guess it sort of like does encourage creatives from within our community to believe that there is a space for the lenses of their stories in a time, where maybe traditionally if there was only 4 projects that were to be commissioned that needed to have quote-unquote broad appeal, the likelihood of a Pan-Asian lens story might maybe not be so successful. But the flip side of that is, then you start, it's that sort of long, hairy question of like, who are the audiences and will one story totally satisfy like an entire community, like a cultural identity? And the answer is obviously no. But yeah, we're sort of like in this tricky stage where everyone is trying to make sure that the stories have integrity and that the stories are being told by the right people, but then there's a sort of assessment level where someone else has to decide if that story is appropriate. It's tricky. It's
very tricky. What's interesting to me, looking at your career again, is that you're basically at this stage where it looks like you could kind of work in the industry. You're way ahead of your peers by any kind of metric as you sort of enter your late teens, early 20s, and then you sort of seem to drop it all and go off and do this double degree. Was that an intentional kind of rejection of the industry, or what drove that, and then what pulled you back?
I've always been quite academic, to be honest. Like, I really enjoyed school. I went to quite an academic school in Wellington, Samuel Marsden Collegiate, and I really kind of thrived on learning. And so I'd always done sciences at school, but I was actually filming things like The Tribe and Young Entertainers while I was at school. So a lot of the time I was having to teach myself on set.
Seems chill.
Yeah, it was terrible because my poor immigrant parents paid a hefty school fee, of which I was never really in the classroom for. Yeah. So I don't know. I mean, you could actually say that's maybe one part of my life trajectory that's maybe perhaps a little more traditional. I think I did genuinely feel like I owed it to my parents and to myself to follow through on that academic baseline and go to uni and get some sort of degree. My parents were pretty awesome in the sense that they were always of the mindset that the degree didn't necessarily have to be the career that I would end up having. It was just like an evolution of thinking. So I actually started off doing an industrial design degree and mixed with chemistry because I was really interested in like the new materials that were being created and like the possible applications for that in design and that. But they were both lab-based degrees, and because I was on a film set so much, I actually had to miss so many labs that at the end it wasn't tenable to continue that degree. So I had to switch for something that I could do via distance, which is how I came into doing a commerce and administration degree, which is where my accounting and commercial law majors came in.
I mean, we're very grateful that you did.
But no, so yeah, basically I just, it was important. Like, I think I'm unusual in the sense that some people are like, oh my gosh, I just always knew that I wanted to be an actor. And to be totally honest, I've always struggled about whether I'm a true creative or not. Like, I think being left and right-brained has sometimes made me doubt whether I have integrity in one or the other. Like, it's always been a pull. So doing the degree was like sort of a good way to, honour the academic sort of legwork and to feel like I had accomplished something in that space.
Just something. So I want to spend quite a bit of time talking about Kāinga and Riddle Me and Here Now. But just before we do, you're also certainly the first Emmy-nominated person I've had on this podcast, and had a role in Fear the Walking Dead. I mean, Neighbours, a huge show for the region. Fear the Walking Dead, one of the biggest shows in the world, like counted on the finger of one hand kind of thing at the time you were on it. And I guess this what I'm kind of trying to explore on some level is like this. There are a number of tensions that your career sort of embodies. That there is just enormous scale and then complete intimacy, and something where you have almost total control of a project at the other end. Was there a part of you, because when you're in that system, you're in LA and the whole of the star system and all that goes along with it.
It's such a system.
Well, tell me about the system, and was there a temptation, or did you try to kind of inhabit it? Like what? Because there's a reason why it is this bright shining light that attracts, that it lives rent-free in everyone's minds.
Well, I mean, I went to LA with not much knowledge of how difficult it was going to be, and I think that was my saving grace, because had I known what I was stepping into, I probably would never have done it. So it was a certain naivety that buoyed me, and it was, we all know that the sort of engine of the global entertainment industry is in America, so without too much thought. Actually, it's kind of funny, it's worth mentioning. I had done Neighbours in Australia. I had been nominated for a Logie. And then they were making the Harry Potter films at the time that I was coming off, and because the UK audience was so passionate about Neighbours, they had started this website petition, oh my gosh, Michelle Ang should play Cho Chang, and I had caught wind of this, and there was enough movement that I think Warner Brothers at the time actually had to send out a statement saying Michelle Ang is not playing Cho Chang.
Wow.
And I thought, well, why not?
Get that framed.
Yeah, well, I was like, maybe Michelle Ang could be Cho Chang. So I flew to the UK, again, naively, and met with the casting director that was doing Harry Potter, and met with other casting directors, and thought, well, maybe that's the next logical step, playing in the UK field for acting. And I was very quickly, and I'm grateful for this, was told that as an East Asian actor, there was absolutely the slimmest chance possible that I'd be able to make a living, because I just wouldn't be cast for roles, because characters weren't being written that looked like me. But straight up, so I was like, okay, I could have wasted 10 years trying to crack it in the UK and wonder what was going on. But some amazing casting director just had the honesty and chutzpah to just say to me, this is not going to work for you. Why don't you try America? So that really kind of got under my skin. And that's why I went to LA. And she was right in some sense. America was more ethnically open, but again, this is in the 2000s. It was still really few and far between the kinds of characters that I would get a read for. And it's interesting what you mentioned in terms of your insight into my career roles, because I think maybe this is where that idea that the work speaks for itself does come through, because despite there not being that many opportunities for me, my mix of looking Asian but having grown up and spent my whole life in New Zealand gave me a really different flavour. And what I noticed was, for characters that were required to be that were written in a stereotypical way of being Asian, I failed miserably. I just never got cast as those characters, because energetically I was this weird hybrid. I was raised in a Western sensibility. And so the roles that I managed to get were often on jobs where the creators and writers were a little more visionary and a little bit more down to take risks. And I think that kind of served me well in a way, because if you look at, I'm quite proud of the caliber of my CV. By no means was I not unemployed. I spent a lot of time not acting, but when people ask me, do I think I was successful? And I had to have day jobs. I wasn't able to live off of my acting all the time. But when I look at the caliber of the projects that I was able to be cast, and I do feel like I was successful because those characters were really interesting, complex characters, and that's kind of because I fit I portrayed characters in a way that was nuanced and not reductive, and yeah.
It's so interesting and kind of heartbreaking to think of that casting agent talking to you in the UK, and because it sort of refers back to what you said about this, like, you know, the Pan-Asian round, where it must be almost explicitly exploring Asianness in some respects, versus one of the things that you actually loved about Laurie Lee was, I'm just a person, you know, and, you know, you sort of think, well, yeah, they might not be, you know, I always loved the idea of, apparently Beverly Hills Cop was written for Sylvester Stallone, and then Eddie Murphy, like, he couldn't do it for some reason. Eddie Murphy comes in and makes it iconic.
His, yeah.
And it's the same script, and it obviously would have been delivered and extemporized in some respects, but it kind of makes you think to what extent, like, you know, why would they require, you know, there must be kind of knotty tensions around even having, you know, ethnicity baked into certain characters where it, you know, what do you think about that whole element?
Well, I'm going to sound very unintelligent here and say I'm a Libran, so I can argue on both sides, which is true. I would say that I'm much more of that sort of viewpoint. But there have been discussions, and it's kind of true. Like, you can't. How do I say this? It's like, I might not be aware of what part my heritage has played in my viewpoint, but there are schools of thought or creatives who feel like there's no way, it's inescapable, the fact that I am an Asian person and I will have a different take. Like, even, for example, just, you know, say the character is a parent, sort of like deep parenting values, for example. Like, it's kind of a no-brainer that even if I'm unaware of it, like, even though I've grown up in New Zealand, there will be something that affects how I view parenting that will be ever so slightly at the essence, slightly different from someone who may have come from, like, a Western lineage and how they view parenting. So there is an argument where there's no such thing as a ethnically non-specific character.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's more that the idea that there could just be a wall rather than a sort of, should we go in this direction, and we'll have to sort of examine some elements of how the character is, you know, interacts with certain situations. You know, that feels, as someone who's a million miles away from understanding how any of this works, but quite enjoys thinking about that on this podcast, it's like, surely that's a better solve than just, well, sorry, we just, you know, that's just a thing where you're just going to have to leave this country rather than try and work in this thing that you're phenomenally talented at. So out the back of that, you've come to do a sort of a trio of different projects, which you know, could not be further from Fear the Walking Dead. Should we talk about those? Like, and they're all quite different. Tell me about Kāinga and your role in that, what it is and why it appealed to you.
So Kāinga is the third feature film in a trilogy that the producers Brown Sugar Apple Grunt started, and that started off with Waru and Vai, which was a portmanteau film made up of little 10-minute segments that were each directed by a different woman director. And so in Waru they had, I think, 8 Māori directors, and in Vai it was the Pacifica population. And Kāinga is the platform for the producers to create a Pan-Asian film. And it was really interesting because I had just come back from America and wasn't really sure what the landscape of sort of New Zealand storytelling and film was like, and this opportunity presented itself. Like, the producers put out a call for submissions, and we had to write an essay basically about what home meant to us. So there was already this idea that the thematic for this film would be home and the meaning of home, the creation of home, like what the touchstones are of, like, having a home, not having a home, leaving home, because obviously Pan-Asian experiences are obviously a lot of migration stories. And so I was really thrilled to be selected, and I was paired with a writer because I don't have a deep writing background, which was also like an interesting challenge. I'd never worked on a team in that sense where I'm directing someone else's work. But it was pretty amazing. We went to this writer's retreat, a development retreat for 5 days, and we basically cracked the backbone of the full narrative. And then each of the writers with their directors and their teams went away to nut out what that vignette would compose of. And my writer was Filipino, so my vignette features a Filipina protagonist. And I think that was really smart pairing on the choice of the producers, because I'm Malaysian Chinese, and the Southeast Asian kind of flavour and understanding of the energetics. Like Filipino culture is really vivacious, and I think Malaysian culture is sort of like, like a tangent to that. So it was a really easy and rich partnership. Yeah.
Oh, that's beautiful. So the next project I want to talk about, which has come out relatively recently, is Riddle Me This on Hey Hey, and a wholly different thing. I assume informed by your status as a mother. So tell me about that project and how that came about.
Well, yeah. So I don't know. I am a mother, and I'm a creative, and I'm surrounded by lots of sort of creative parents who, we look at our worlds with a sort of certain aesthetic, and I thought it was really strange that in the children's space there wasn't anything that was visually sophisticated, or not that I had come across. And I was like, I just know that with all the mums and dads I know who have got such an amazing aesthetic, I'm sure they're hungry for sharing something with their children that is a little bit more aligned to their tastes. So, I came up with this idea. I think problem solving and like curiosity and imagination is really integral for young developing minds, and riddles is a perfect format to like pose to children and sort of like encourage them to ask the right questions and make the connections to find the solution in a fun way. And my son was really into riddles at the time, so I thought, okay, how's about we go and canvas New Zealand kids, and we'll write these riddles and get them to ask questions on the evolution to finding the answer. And I also realised that actually the child media space is totally commandeered by overseas content. Like Peppa Pig is like British. There's like all these weird toddlers going around going, "I'm Peppa Pig," and then there's obviously a lot of American content. And coming back from America with my child, I was like, well, I want him to like hear the children that he interacts with and hear himself reflected in the media that he's consuming. So it was really exciting to like go into schools in Tamaki Makaurau and capture what New Zealand kids sound like, which is actually quite broad, because we have a lot of like immigrants. It's wonderful. And the idea of I was really fascinated with the idea of removing the face value aspect of where these voices were coming from. And I guess just sort of riffing here, like maybe it's because of what I've experienced in my career about like face value really having an impact on the perceived like personality or like, opportunity. And so taking away the face value and just leaving these beautiful audio imprints of our children was really powerful. And I think if anyone watches it, you'll see what I mean. Like the personalities of these individuals is so shiny and bright and way more wonderful than if we had any sort of video to match. And I partnered with this really exciting art director that I had found, because I've worked in animation before. I was a manager of the design department in a New York animation firm as a day job one time. I knew that there was amazing talent in New Zealand that just hadn't gotten a chance to flex. So working with Robert Wallace, who goes as Parallel T, who's known as Parallel T.
I know Rob. He's incredible.
His choice. And again, his aesthetic is so sophisticated, but like my son loved his stuff. And I was like, why is Robert not working in a space that children can interact with? So we sort of went out and found really exciting animators and gave them it was actually, I think it was a really fun project for them, because it was basically 4 or 5 minutes of them creating whatever they wanted to illustrate like the critical story path that these children had created in their goal of solving a riddle.
The Fold is brought to you by O Media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa, with over 4,000 out-of-home advertising sites nationwide across both street furniture and retail centres. I'm super grateful to O Media for enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Skinny are helping you show how smart you are with the 1Q quiz, an all-new, super challenging and super quick daily quiz built by the Spinoff. Every Monday, Skinny are giving you the chance to prove you're smart with the Skinny Extra Credit question. Get it right, and you'll get the chance to score yourself some Skinny Extra mobile credit so you can text, call, or even video call your group chat and gloat about how big your brain is. T's and C's apply.
Raising capital or taking your business to the world? Investment Fix has the lowdown on everything you need to make it happen. This season, we're exploring the US market, the opportunities it offers, what it takes to grow a business there, and the best way to approach investors. Join some of the superstars of the investment and business world as they share advice from their time in the US so you can make your mahi count in this massive market. The Investment Fix podcast, brought to you by Invest New Zealand. Tune in today.
And then lastly, let's talk about Here Now, which is your new project for the spin-off. I remember when Amber first took the treatment to me, would have been coming up, maybe 18 months ago or something, and just thinking about how, and this puts, as if everything you have said hasn't put light to this idea that, I don't know if I'm creative or not. It's like, are you kidding me? But the conceit of it, which is about women's relationship with hair and and is ultimately told through sort of 6 vignettes, to use your word, and it's one of those obviously as a dude like hiding in plain sight things about that is actually like of consuming kind of, I don't know, women's relationship with hair doesn't feel like it gets talked about anywhere near enough. And when you watch these episodes, the thought, the level of kind of the cultural impact of it, what it signals to the world, there is so much in there. Why this? And you must be quite thrilled with how it's come out.
Yeah, I mean, it was a real labour of love because you're right, it was probably maybe even 2 years ago that this idea was sort of birthed, and we've had to negotiate how to film this really personal, going into people's sort of like private lives during a COVID era. And I just want to say, it's not just the fact that you're a dude. Actually, it was really the fact that women don't even talk about it to other women. I learned so much about it.
Really?
Yeah, I had no idea. And actually, the first episode has come out. And I think if you look at the comments, it's really shining a light for other women as well, which is important in the sense that it just speaks to this idea that this dividing up audience or society into these groups is a way to sort of hone an angle, but it's never going to be homogenous. Even within, women audiences, there's so much we need to learn about each other. But yeah, I came up with this idea actually when I was in Los Angeles, and noticed that there's hair salons and a really interesting relationship with women and their hair practitioners, perhaps a little bit akin to men and their bartenders. It was just this sort of sacred space where you were able to be a bit vulnerable, but also augment yourself or present yourself in a way that was a little bit more you could control the way you presented yourself. And in LA specifically, there's Chinatown where there were these old elderly grandmothers who would go in to get their hair cut, and then you'd go to Beverly Hills and there's these rich housewives who are getting their hair coloured, and then you'd go to Compton and there's this lovely energy of what it feels like to be in an African American hair salon down there. So that was an idea that I had sat with for a while, and I'd actually started researching while I was over there, but hadn't found a way to make it. And then when I came back to New Zealand, there was a specific Pan-Asian RFP that New Zealand and Air put out, which was the first of its kind, and it got me super excited because I was like, this is an angle, and I know that within the Pan-Asian community, there's so many different religions, so many different experiences of first, second, third generation migrants. And yeah, from the outset, I was really excited to present something that didn't have an agenda across the series. I really wanted to find subjects that, for example, were clinging to their culture as a way to hold on to their identity versus maybe finding a subject that was completely the antithesis of that, someone who absolutely felt the liberalness of being in New Zealand meant they could shirk everything and build their identity from the ground up, free from the cultural or religious ramifications. And I don't know. I don't know if I managed to achieve it in the way that I wanted to, because it was really, really difficult to research under the circumstances. I'd love to have another crack at it, especially now that we've got, we've got this living series that potential subjects can see that their material is going to be treated hopefully with dignity. And I think that's something that's worth mentioning too. It's interesting. Like, we are moving into a place where we are able to create content either about or for these audiences, but especially in documentary, these subjects have never been reached out to before to appear or to share their stories, and a lot of them were very nervous or cautious or cynical about it. It was really hard to get access, even though I am, Asian myself. So many women reached out and shared stories with me, but the moment I said, listen, would you be comfortable if I was to turn on a camera, would you share the same story with me? They absolutely were like, no, my husband wouldn't be okay with that, or, oh no, I don't want everyone to know about this. It was interesting and slightly sort of shocking to me to realize that.
Yeah, I mean, because there is a very kind of cynical and kind of, there's a way that you could make this, and probably it would have been until quite recently, if someone were to do it, that would have been the default. So you can understand why people have that reticence, but there's a sort of a beautiful sense of intimacy and care that comes across. I think about those moments where, like Yasmin is shaving and having electrolysis and talking about the decision that she made. She took to wear the hijab, and there's just like, these are they're around you every day, and yet the level of thought and the kind of socio-cultural considerations that weigh and kind of contain and liberate and have that whole complexity. It's quite, it's just, how did you go about with those that you did manage to kind of convince to go along, kind of convincing them or getting them to be as open to you as the show really required to kind of reach what it could become?
Well, this is my first foray into documentary, and I can absolutely say I understand why people fall in love with it. It feels like such a privilege to reach out to a stranger and then spend the time to build trust and intimacy where you can ask those questions. And like I said, because this was COVID, a lot of this I had to do via a phone conversation or via Zoom, which to me, I'm kind of like an introvert. I find it hard to do things en masse with lots of people. So this one-on-one was a good, it's a good format for me to sort of be able to connect with someone. But I find it hard to connect over screens. And I do wonder if it would have had a different outcome if I had that ability to go into communities to meet face to face. But I think I learned that it's a two-way street. I found that the best ways to create space for the subject to share was to share myself. Yeah, to sort of expose vulnerabilities or sort of share personal stories myself that then, so it was like not a quid pro quo, that doesn't sound nice, but it wasn't, I wasn't taking advantage, it wasn't a one-way street. It wasn't them exposing everything to me. But I do think also the fact that I was from, within these communities, my cousin, because we're from Malaysia, my cousin is Muslim. I'm sensitive to some of the extra caretaking that needed to be involved. For example, Yasmin, right from the outset, I knew that there would be certain areas that we wouldn't be able to film. But the kind of brilliant problem was that how do I insinuate these things you're talking about visually that we can't show? So we went the extra mile, for example, making sure we had a female crew as much as possible, which was sometimes difficult. And in the laser salon, I knew to bring in props like towels and cloaks so that we could, cover her legs in a way that she felt was going to be appropriate. And just sort of preempting these issues as opposed to, getting to a shoot day and then putting the subject in a position where they would have to bring it up. I think that was really important. But something that the reason why I love Yasmin as a subject is because she single-handedly, like you mentioned, breaks apart what it means to be a Muslim woman. Like, she wanted to wear the hijab. I feel like,
that's an extraordinary revelation,
isn't
right?
it amazing?
In terms of the common way that we conceive of its function.
I thought it was amazing. And the fact that it was her parents who were really trying to get her not to wear it.
Yeah.
And she, because of this idea that that it wasn't attractive, that hair is beautiful or could be sexualized, and it's sort of so the opposite from what our mainstream understanding of a young person in that culture would have to deal with. I thought that totally blew me away.
It's just so nice when you come across situations where the complexity of life and how reductive so many of our sort of notions and how othering it can be. It just sort of explodes right in front of you, and it kind of forces you to reassess a whole bunch of the other ways you think about the world and the people in it.
I mean, that's the hope, right? I mean, I think also that another moment that really I hope sort of shakes people up a bit is when she talks about how she chooses her hijabs and how the colour.
Yeah.
She was like, no, the colour is really about does it match my top? What am I feeling like? I love how, how realistic and modern and it was such an insight into that choice for Muslim women. I thought she was phenomenal. And also, just to speak back to the intimacy, when she is shaving her upper lip, you hear her soundbite. She's like, "Wow, this is so empowering." And I think something that was a beautiful discovery was that the subjects went along with us. They became braver through the questions I was asking, and in some ways maybe hadn't interrogated the reason why they do things themselves, but having to talk to someone like myself about why or how, it gave them an ability to sort of grow and to understand their own views about things. So it was really like a commune, it wasn't it's not like I went in and just photographed them. I feel like they, in the process, also got to grow as well as myself as a filmmaker.
So do you think, because, again, in terms of all the many tensions that your career embodies in a way, you talked about falling in love with documentary, and you've made these much more small-scale projects where there's just a lot more ability to kind of control the shape of them. Does that feel like where you're headed now, where you'd like to sort of stay, or where's the Michelle Ong project going now?
Well, I was going to say the tensions is the right word, because as much as beautiful as the crafting of a documentary is, I'm well aware of how difficult it is to make a living. Talking about feature-length documentaries,
the steadily shrinking pool of documentary commissioning.
Well, and also just the length of time necessary to get good stories. Long-form documentary is wonderful, but I feel like time is very much a component of getting the goods. I think, if I'm being totally honest, I'm not really ready to launch into long form doco yet. You actually missed one credit that I have out also at the same time, which is a web series I directed called Self-Help. It's out on YouTube right now, and it was part of the Rangatahi funding round. As a young director, which is a step I probably could have taken earlier in my career but didn't have the confidence to. And I'm really proud of that too. So I'm just going to drop that in there.
Quite an implausible, amount of creative work that's come out.
I think I just made the most of the year of lockdown and just went hard. But I'm really interested in directing, I think. My sensibilities and lend themselves, I think, currently more to narrative. So if there's opportunities there, whether it's projects that I've created myself or to step onto someone else's story, I kind of feel like that's probably the area that I would love to keep stepping towards.
Right.
Yeah.
And lastly, and we that's been kind of threaded through it, but I'd like to address it, the Pan Asian Screen Collective, of which you're a part, and which seems to have, I don't think it can be a coincidence that there are, the visibility and the viability of Pan-Asian screen careers seems to have flourished in parallel with its formation and progress. Tell me about it and your role in it, and what's working and not about the system for the Pan-Asian community.
Oof, okay. Well,
Just a wee one.
Yeah. They started up a long time ago, and I joined late because I didn't know what was going on while I was in America. And I think one of the ways that they have lobbied for us is basically giving the creatives, the Pan-Asian creatives, the confidence to go for funding rounds. I think there was a really sort of deep-seated feeling that, in a general funding round, these Pan-Asian creatives who sort of systemically don't have the right sort of credits are much more in terms of their career behind what the other pool of submissions might be. That was like one off-putting factor. Another one was perhaps the broad appeal necessity. Some of the stories that our community is interested in telling, if they were to, I think there was just self-judgment about whether there'd be a place for them. And what the Pan-Asian Screen Collective has done is really pushed all of us creatives to find a way to submit for every funding round and to give us the confidence in a way that our stories will matter and will be seen. And I think as a result, I'm sure the funding bodies can see now, like, they used to say, well, there's not that many stories to tell. That was not true. It's just that we weren't putting in our stories. And now I think the true depth of like what our storytellers have to share has become apparent. And they also, I think they work really hard to, just something that we touched upon earlier, this idea of like, what does it mean to have an Asian story? I think because PASC is internal, like, that they understand the complexities of the burden of representation, and I think they're really crucial in helping the powers that be understand that there needs to be nuance in the stories. There needs to be this alleviation of the idea that we get one Chinese story, and that one Chinese story has to ensure that all Chinese in New Zealand feel represented. Like, that is just fundamentally impossible, and also totally negates the point of storytelling, which is about having a specific point of view. And then also there's like upskilling as well. I feel like there's a really healthy sense of community where we're working on each other's projects, and as a result, people within the equity are having opportunities to, work on a bigger set or upskill from a PA to a camera assistant, and sort of like building these alliances from within working teams that it's going to sort of like keep growing the expertise within that community in a really meaningful way.
That's beautiful. No, it really is, and I think that the extent to which the screen Aotearoa, the whole of the thing, feels more open to different communities. By no means work done, and by no means uncomplicated, but that work is it's powerful and important.
It's so powerful. And also, and this is going to sound really funny and stereotypical, but hopefully also funny, like Shuchi Kathari, who's one of the founders, we always joke, like, the Asian work ethic is just so intense. Like, when we have to do a proposal, it's like all of us like go 150%. So like the quality of the submissions is always like really, really high. It's something to be proud of. Like just sort of collectively, I think everyone is really hungry, but also very diligent and studious and aware of like how important their participation in the creation of media is.
Yeah, no, I think that's really good. And it's, to influence government, which is ultimately the source of a lot of cultural funding in New Zealand, like it requires a sustained and almost exhausting amount of pressure and it's, I don't know if lobbying is the right word, but
sort of advocacy.
Yeah. And it's a credit to PAS's work that it's been able to achieve what it has, and you've obviously played a huge role in that.
I don't know if it's huge. I think I'm just, it's some of many parts. It's also interesting because I've just come back from the Melbourne International Film Festival, where the Film Commission brought the Kāinga filmmakers to participate in the Directors Accelerator Lab, and we got to talk to industry over there, and there really is hardly. We have so much work to do, but just in comparison to like what our Australian counterparts are having to deal with, like we're taking good steps. It was really palpable, but ultimately the sobering takeaway from that whole week was that the Asia Pacific is such a small part of the global viewing population. And I think something that's interesting that I've been thinking about recently is, we're lucky to have public funding, and there's a sort of idea that we're over-reliant potentially on I think there's a real need for public funding, but there's also we have, in terms of IP per capita, New Zealand is amazing. We have brilliant ideas, brilliant creators, and I think what could be really interesting is to teach our creators how to be more resourceful and to not just rely on public funding. But a sobering fact of that was that basically when you play in the big global world, it's very American-centric. Everyone on the panel, whether it was an indie filmmaker or a commercial filmmaker, was basically you can't unlock financing unless you have a star name, like you mentioned. And star names and algorithms were only ever built for white American stars, because if I write a Malaysian Chinese story, where am I going to find an actress who fulfills that metric that would unlock financing? It's just not going to happen. So there's lots of, that's taken up quite a bit of my mind recently about what does it mean if we want to play on a global stage, which I believe wholeheartedly that New Zealand creatives could, and how do we disrupt this idea that it needs to be commercially successful, we need these tried and true algorithms that have been presented to us from a legacy of American star factories.
I mean, I think that the New Zealand story in terms of creativity is of doing stuff that would never be commissioned by the algo, and it's succeeding precisely because of that. And so, hopefully that remains our sort of edge, and any kind of infrastructure or funding that is set up kind of keeps that in mind. Keep New Zealand weird and different in its own thing. Hey, thanks so much for coming on The Fold, Michelle. It's been really, really fascinating to speak with you.
Thank you so much, Duncan.
The Fold was brought to you by the Spinoff Podcast Network, together with Daylight. It was hosted by Duncan Grieve, produced by T.I. Butler, with production management by Rachel LaRue and series production by Jane Yee.
That was The Fold, brought to you by our partners at oOh!media, making brands unmissable and public spaces better across Aotearoa. Huge thanks to oOh!media for sponsoring this episode of The Fold and enabling us to make unmissable connections with Kiwis.
Ready to rediscover the joys of cycling? With over 300 kilometres of cycle paths across Tāmaki Makaurau, jumping on your bike and going for a ride is such a fun way to discover the city from a different perspective. Cycling is getting more and more popular across Auckland, so now's a great time to join the hype and give cycling a go. Head to at.govt/cycling to find your nearest cycleway today. The Spinoff Podcast Network.